Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to the Shift Spot, the Revenue Enablement Series. This is part two of this a four-part series. So it's the Revenue Enablement Series. Last week we did the customer lifecycle. This week we will do lead generation for B2B companies. Next week we have the sales and opportunity management. And then the last one on the 22nd of February is revenue enablement, leadership, and management. So I'm very excited about this series. Of course, this is what I do. So hopefully, folks will. If you weren't able to participate last week, you will. I'll give a quick summary here, and those recordings are available as well. But today's agenda, we have quite a bit to cover. So I'm going to do a brief summary from the session one, common marketing pain points, lead generation strategies, lead qualification, content, resources, technology stack, and then, okay, well, when I get all this information, what do I do next? And then open it up for some questions and answers. So with that, we'll continue to move forward. So the summary from session one, again, for those that were not able to participate, the recording is available as part of the Shift Spot membership. Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can believe that you can submit questions, and I will get back to the individuals with answers, and we can schedule some time and accordingly, right, Ken?
Yeah, correct. So in the community, they can just @gem. So I've already I've done that on something. You should have received an email, and then you can respond to them back. You know, in the community, if it's more in depth, you can obviously take it offline. But correct.
Great, thank you, Ken. So the summary from session one, we talked about the customer lifecycle, the customer buying journey, but more importantly, we're creating that foundation, that blueprint for success. So that's defined as target market, the ideal customer profile, buyer personas, and internal team structure. Now that all will build on what we're going to talk about today in the lead generation session. So again, this is a very brief summary from session one, but I want the audience to keep in mind the importance of the target market, ideal customer profile, buyer personas, and team structure. If you have those in place, you'll have your foundation for success. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but here's why you maybe should listen to me and some of the credibility. I'm not going to go through each one of these, other than I've been doing this for quite some time. I sat in the chief marketing officer seat. I've sat in the chief sales officer seat. I've sat in chief revenue officer seats, mostly for all B2B companies and mostly B2B technology companies. But this information, these processes can be across other verticals, such as manufacturing, professional services. It really doesn't matter. And I've built numerous sales teams incorporating these type of processes and foundations, and it will drive success. So the next slide, this is kind of an extension from what we talked about last week, and I'm just going to focus on the far left, those two areas of the customer life cycle, the awareness and education. So a lead generation and lead development. This is really where the marketing resources of your organization are going to be involved, and they're going to have the accountability and the KPIs. And I'll talk about the KPIs later in this conversation, because those are really important to track, because there is going to be a significant investment in these overall programs that we'll be talking about. So I'd be surprised if the audience, if they haven't seen any of these pain points here we're talking about today. I hear this time and time again from my clients, my CEOs, and CEOs that I worked for in the past as well. So low conversions, generating referrals. I like this one a lot, because this is in line with what I've seen over the course of my career is like, look at those numbers. 65% of new business comes from referrals, and consumers are 4 times more likely to buy when referred by a friend. So again, those referrals, that's a programmatic approach that we will not spend a lot of time today talking about, but that's something that the components we will talk about today, where we can leverage those to create your referral business as well. Qualified leads, I've seen, it's interesting because what we want to avoid with this revenue enablement structure is, sales saying marketing's, generating bupkis leads, and marketing saying, these sales guys are knuckleheads and they don't know how to follow up on this. So I think we want to talk about we will talk about some KPIs and why this is important, and how to structure the team so that there is alignment between the two teams. And then moving to the other side of the slide, the CEOs, most CEOs are complaining they don't have enough revenue, and the profitability as well. So, and I think as important is the poor execution, because there is a significant investment to generate quality leads, to generate quality content. So, that's why it's so important to define not only the revenue enablement framework, but the marketing framework around that too. So, and then I've also seen this, like, shiny objects, like squirrel, boom, I want to go after this thing, and don't, right? Put the plan in place, come up with a framework, and then execute on that framework. So changes will be made, but it takes a while when you're doing these lead generation programs. And when I say a while, it's measured in weeks or months, not days. So that's a pretty important component of this whole thing. So when we talk about modern digital marketing, look at this. I mean, the average buyers are 70% through the buying decision before engaging a sales rep. And I think, Ken, we might have mentioned that last week. I don't know what numbers you've heard. And this probably, the only way this is going is probably up, right? So
yeah, it is. And yeah, I mean, the stuff that I've read, and I'm sure it's very similar to you, is just that buyers are more and more educated. They do all their research before they come to us, right? So, they have a lot of information and made a lot of their decisions already. So if we can't push them over after that, then shame on us.
That's absolutely true. And that's, again, why it's important with your outbound. And I'll talk about some of these definitions here shortly. But it's so important to do, your education, your branding, and be consistent, right? And there are numerous nodes that we can talk that are included in part of this whole modern digital marketing. I'm not going to spend much time talking about branding or specific social media programs or about video production. ABM stands for account-based marketing, but all of these are in fact important components of a complete marketing and lead generation strategy and programs. So we will talk a little bit about the search engine marketing, the resources for web design, search engine optimization, email marketing, and then content marketing as well. So, again, I realize that this is kind of antithesis for market. Sorry, Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a question. Go back to that previous slide, and
yes.
Maybe you're going to get into this. It would be interesting if you have like some best practice ideas on how to even allocate budgets into some of these areas. And maybe it's impossible. Maybe it's per company, per industry. I have no idea. I'm not a marketer, never pretended to be a marketer.
Didn't stay at a Holiday Inn, right? So
yeah. So, I've had lots of marketers report to me, and the thing I don't like about marketers, I can get a social media person, a branding person, content, email, video production, SEO, web design, all these folks in a room, and they are all going to have the strategy and the best recommendation. And I know it's a multifaceted approach, but I think a lot of owners get confused on how much time and money should I allocate into each of those. So I don't know if that's going to be in your presentation, but really awesome to get some, best practices or thoughts around that.
Let's not specifically, but that's a great question. And I think we can address it a little bit later.
Okay.
And maybe do some follow-up on that, because I do talk a little bit about budget. I do talk about some of this programmatic approach, but it's hard because it is dependent on the company. It depends on the market, depends on the product and service you're selling, right? So it's challenging because, to your point, if you've got all those different resources, they're like, okay, I've got to have this big bucket of money, and
Yeah.
there's not unlimited funds out there for this. So it's like, how do you structure it so that you can do all of these things and have some efficacy behind each component of these, right?
Yes. Yep.
So I think we'll touch on that later, and if one of these slides, as I look at those, that I believe we can maybe address that. I'll try and address that a little bit later, but that may be something that I'll put in the shift spot on one of those discussion boards.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That please.
That's a good idea.
I'll actually tag you. So just plow forward. I'll tag you on that question.
Great, thank you. So I realize this is a very text-heavy slide, but this is pretty darn important. So, I mean, to Ken, you mentioned that you weren't a marketer, but everybody's coming to you with a great ideas, right? So as a CEO, I think it's important that you at least have an understanding of some of the key strategies that we're seeing day in and day out. And especially, again, considering that previous slide says 70% of the research is done prior to even engaging a selling resource. So what do we have? We have inbound marketing, right? That's going to be some of the social media and do brand awareness, right? We have outbound marketing, which is typically more expensive and the ROI is lower. And then you may have heard of this whole omnichannel, but omnichannel means multiple marketing channels: online, offline, social. So that's all these 5 areas are really key strategies for your lead generation. So again, each one of these can have a pretty significant session allocated to that. But today our intent is to kind of wave top on the overall framework for lead generation. But again, happy to talk in greater detail about either one of these. And the differentiation, again, between the SEM, it's those are much that's paid tactics to gain visibility, also known as paid per click. And SEO is approach that uses organic methods for that. So again, I think it's important to understand, when somebody says, okay, your inbound marketing program is not meeting the KPIs that you're looking for, what does that mean? Where do you need to change? What do you have a different social media channel you have to go after? So and then, okay, when we do outbound marketing, are you using SDRs, or what are your salespeople doing? And we'll talk about that in a little more detail coming up here. So so now we've got lead generation strategies. What's a lead qualification definition? So a lead is, if you look at kind of that classic funnel, which I'm never a big fan of, but I think from a visual, that's a good place to start. So a lead is, again, the entire universe that you're targeting. And that's why it's important to have your ideal customer profile, your buyer personas, and your verticals, right? Because you got to start somewhere. So this is why, again, the target verticals, ideal customer profile, and buyer personas. So you've got that whole universe of lead that your strategies from before, your omnichannel, your outbound, your inbound, you're starting to target those. Now the next one goes to marketing qualified leads. So that, again, as you can see from here, is like, okay, there's some engagement. There's engagement, but it could be a website. They could read your white papers. They could read your newsletters. They could hit landing pages. But it aligns with your overall definition of who can become a possible customer or move into an opportunity based on some of these intent personas and contact requirements. And then it goes to a sales qualified lead. I have seen a sales accepted lead, but I like to try and minimize the number of lead qualifications there are. So my recommendation is The sales accepted lead really is, I think, not a good measure. I mean, that's why I'm not addressing it here. So the sales qualified lead, and the important thing here is it's qualified by a selling resource. And why is that important? Excuse me. That's important because, as I mentioned earlier, you tend to have this, in typical organizations, you have this conflict between sales and marketing saying, sales like, oh, that's not a qualified lead, or marketing is like, salespeople are terrible at following up leads. This creates the framework for once a selling resource has qualified it, then it truly is a sales qualified lead, and the responsibility and accountability move to the salesperson.
That's interesting. You say you do not recommend an SQL, so that measure.
No, a sales accepted lead. Sorry, sales accepted.
Okay.
I absolutely recommend sales qualified leads.
Gotcha.
So there's really, three lead qualifications. At the top of the funnel, your targets, your marketing qualified leads based on some sort of engagement by your prospects, right? And those engagement, you can automate some of the engagement. So for example, with HubSpot, you can assign certain points to certain levels of engagement. So a white paper may have a higher point categorization than just hitting a landing page, right? Or, setting saying, I want to set a meeting with an SDR or salesperson. That's also going to, it can set a different level too. So there's some automation components to this as well. Okay. So, I would encourage everyone to take a look at that. And then it does go to sales qualified leads, Ken. So just as as clarification, I absolutely recommend sales qualified leads, but I'm not a fan of sales accepted leads. You sometimes will hear that as well.
Okay.
And then once a sales qualified lead can go any one of three different ways, right? So it can either go to a nurture, which we're not speaking a lot about this week because that tends to either be could be a sales activity. So it goes to a nurture, it goes to an opportunity, and next week we'll spend time talking about opportunity in the start of the sales process itself. Or it can say, okay, no, these really aren't it's not a good lead, and we can just disqualify that, and it goes away.
Okay. All right. Jim, I've heard, but our audience probably doesn't. I grew up in the sales ranks, right? I've ran large sales teams at, companies like Oracle, et cetera. So the general rule of thumb and honestly, I found that it actually translates across really all industries is, for pipeline coverage, generally is a 3x coverage, meaning if you have $1 million that you need to close, and in theory, you should have 3 million in qualified pipeline to achieve that number is a good rule of thumb. Are there any rules of thumbs on SQLs, MQLs that you should actually have prior to that? I don't know if there's something that says, for you to hit the 3x, you got to have 6x in SQLs or 12x in MQLs. Is there any science around that?
Yes, there is actually. And how about right here?
Okay.
So that's a great lead in, and trust me, to the audience, we did not plan that question, but that's but yes, I mean so here's what I've seen based on my experience, right? I mean, these numbers are realistic. I've seen this time and time again. So you want to work backwards, right? So you say from every closed opportunity, from an SQL, I'll close 25% of those. From every MQL to an SQL, I will do the conversion at 40%. From every lead to MQL, I will do a 10% conversion. So that means that for every 100 leads, for every closed deal, I need 100 leads, right? So I think is that kind of what you're asking,
Yeah.
Ken?
Yeah.
So again, that you can see if you move the needle on any of these, I mean, that'll drop a tremendous. You can easily increase your selling revenue, your deal closing rates by I've seen 15 to 18% if you move that needle on 5% of every one of those.
Right.
but these are numbers that I've seen time and time again, that, you can start with, right? And some people have these numbers, but most of my clients that I deal with in a past life, starting all these, it's like, okay, where are we going to start? How are you going to hold your team accountable? And what are we going to use for KPIs? So again, this is why it's so important to do the follow-up from the MQL to SQL, and have those selling resources be involved. But if you have really good programs, and you increase that, the MQL by 50%, and you close your target, your target close rate to 30%, those will really move that revenue needle a lot. And this is also how you asked me about budget earlier. This is also how you say, okay, if I really need 100 leads for every closed deal, what channel is that going to come from? How should I allocate that? What's the efficacy of my different campaigns, right? So you can measure those components and say, okay, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but for example, video has been the most consumed content that's out there now for I think well over a year. And it doesn't have to be professional videos, but it has to be targeted, and it has to contain value messaging to your prospect environments.
Yeah, you hit a point, and I just wanted to pull on it a little bit more. I'm curious. So the shift spot, I mean, our target market is 50 million and below, right? Generally above that, companies are a little bit more mature and seasoned and understand some of these things, right? But honestly, I personally have worked with a company that's a $300 million business and had no idea what their numbers were from a sales and marketing perspective. It was astonishing. But anyways, you said a lot don't. How many businesses out there do you think, and in your experience that you work with, truly don't understand their numbers? And as you had stated, just being able to put together a budget and understanding what success is, and understanding where you're winning and where you're losing. I mean, this is critical. What would your gut tell you? Less than 50, less than 30? What do you think?
Less than 20.
Jeez, that's amazing.
For companies in the size you're talking about, Kevin,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
There's the companies that get a larger that have rigor to it, and this is I cannot think of an organization that I've worked for in the last 20 years prior to my arriving that could give me these numbers.
That's unfathomable to me, and I can't hit this point enough. I don't care if you're a 2-person company, a 10-person company, a 100-person company, or what your revenues are. The sooner you understand this, the easier it is to make investments and understand your investments and understand success and hold people accountable. So good.
The accountability and the shiny objects, right? Because when we look at this, there is a big investment in marketing, and when the CEO comes in to talk to the CRO or the CMO, is like, I'm spending tens of thousands or whatever the number is. It's not insignificant. What's your, how are you doing against these programs? How are you tracking these programs? So, and then, from a planning perspective, if I look at this, seriously, I put this in place, in the first month when I come in, because I don't know how I can budget, right? So,
yeah.
And these numbers can vary, right? But if you start here, I would challenge and say, okay, is your close rate really more than 25% from a sales qualified lead right now? And quite frankly, most people can't answer that.
Right. And without it, quite honestly, you're operating on emotions versus data. And when you're doing that, it's just it follows a path of tears, right? So
correct. Yep. So I mean, this is I mean, in some ways the money slide, right? So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about content, right? So this I mean, if you look at those 2 numbers on the right, and to try and proactively ask the question, you said, do I see this out there? Yeah, yes, I do. And those numbers are in fact believable, right? So, I mean, there's both HubSpot and Salesforce and probably others like Pipedrive. You can actually track the engagement of the content used by sales reps. And I think that, if you're not doing that, how do you know what's working, right? So it's not only a combination of okay, this inbound lead came because this white paper was so great, or we created 15 MQLs, 20 MQLs from this video production, right?
Right.
So again, I mean, this list can get pretty long, but at the really high level, you look at, okay, I've got my website, so my landing pages, my calls to actions, my blogs, and on the website, obviously, it's the white papers and videos, but you also, for your talk tracks, for your, some people use SDRs. It depends on the size of your organization. That stands for sales development representatives, sorry. They need those talk tracks, right? Campaigns. What's your outbound campaign? What's your inbound campaign? What are your omnichannel campaigns? How do you measure against that, right? What is your social media campaigns? And then marketing is also responsible for your ideal customer profiles and your sales playbook development. So, I mean, you hear the term, or at least I hear the term a lot, and it's probably because I use it a lot, but content is king. It truly is, right? Because I don't care what industry you're in, it's a very competitive marketplace out there, right? So how do you differentiate yourself? It's by having some very, very poignant and content, and probably I'm not saying that you need more is merrier, but what's important is having the right content based on your buyer personas, based on your target market. And I know I sound like a broken record here, but it works. It works. So if you've got your key entry points within an organization, let's say it's a CIO or a CEO or a VP of engineering, you need those value propositions and campaigns for each of those target entry points, because as we're looking at attracting in these deals, once they go into an opportunity, you have multiple decision makers, and those multiple decision makers, they consume different content throughout the sales cycle. So you want to, you don't want your salespeople creating content. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had salespeople come to me and say, these marketing decks are just miserable because they don't have a pulse on what's really going on, right? So
right.
we need to eliminate that. So that's, I mean, again, the importance of the content, the key messages aligned with the personas, aligned with your target market. So there's a lot here to unpack, and this is really where, when we look at the previous slide, these planning metrics is like, okay, so from our leads, what content do we need for awareness, right? Which is a little different than once we get to SQL, or engagement. So again, I think that, as we look at all these, there is a prioritization. I would encourage everyone to have a content audit. It's like, what do I have today? And how is it getting utilized? If you don't know that, you need to know that. So
yeah, agree. We invest heavily in one of my companies in content, and we actually ironically just went through a process of paring it back actually, and looked at content that's it's out there, been out there, no one accesses or utilizes. So but yeah,
and if nobody's you can track the engagement with your content, and you should be doing that on a very consistent and frequent basis as well.
Yeah,
I mean, because the thought of not tracking the content, it kind of gives me hives, but that's a different story. So let's talk about people, right? Your people are critical to this, right? So I think you mentioned earlier, Ken, you've got somebody that comes to you with a video, you've got somebody that comes to you with the white papers, right? So, but if we look at these, you're going to have people that have the web expertise, right? You're going to have content writers. You need general marketing resources, under the categories of campaign management, SEO, SEM, social, event planning, right? And then you're going to, in an organization, because you got to have some technology, to support this, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But so and the way I've categorized it, as we talked about last week, is I like to have the revenue operations supporting the technology stack. And when I talk about revenue operations, again, those revenue ops, those people support both the sales and the marketing and the CX with the technology. So that can be marketing automation software, that can be marketing analytics software, that could be your CRM. But again, we'll chat about that some more. And then the sales development reps, right? So the SDRs, and for reporting for those, sometimes I've seen it report into marketing. Sometimes I see it report into the sales director or sales executive. Quite frankly, I don't, my preference is to have that, because it's got sales in it, is to have that report into the sales organization, because that will move your MQLs to the SQLs. And depending on what you're selling, that you might want to have those more junior resources doing the true qualification, getting it set up for some of your senior hunters. So again, it depends on the size of your organization. Typically I'll see SDRs in organizations that are about 10 to 15 million and above, because I think that in today's environment, those are smiling and dialing people, so they're associated a lot with your outbound.
Yeah.
And also, when you look at these people, this can be internal people, external people, a combination of the above. I am a fan of using agencies for certain components, but that depends on what kind of resources you have in general. But the cautionary note I would mention about agencies is somebody has to spend some time managing those agencies, because there is some fees involved. But if I'm a big fan of agencies, and I've worked with numerous ones over the course of my career. And as long as they're managed correctly, as long as you set key deliverables and accountability, that ultimately I think you can get a better return on investment as opposed to trying to hire all these people, right? Because you can see that, geez, I need somebody to do campaign management and SEO, right? Well, there's a lot of SEO SEM experts out there today that you can get for a pretty cost effective, but you have to make sure that, okay, with your keywords and your messaging, that's clearly communicated to those outside resources.
Yeah, but there are, and I know you know this, there's all sorts of quality differences as well, right? You can get very cost-effective SEO experts that quite honestly slap the title on themselves, and I've seen those, and they don't have the analytics and the views and give you basically the kind of roadmap that some of the higher end folks can.
Yes, I mean that when you select these, I would highly recommend that you're engaging somebody that knows how to select these. And you say, well, how do you do that? I mean, either your CMO, your CSO, or your CRO, those you need to look at how you're evaluating these folks too. And there's some pretty good evaluation templates out there as well. So
yeah.
But to your point, but I'm going to show you a slide in a couple slides from now that's just going to make your head explode and say, Ken, to your point, is like, how do I select these? Because there are a lot of people out there, right?
Yeah. One of the members of the Shift Spot actually is Viola, who's with Flow. They're about 15 person agency out of Germany, and they do phenomenal work. They've done some work for me and also with some clients as well. But so if anyone listening or watching this wants to home in on that specifically, it's a good resource.
And I did also in the sales development rep, there's a lot of outsourcing companies, and right now I know, Ken, you're evaluating one that looks extremely interesting to me, but there's always that cautionary note there of who gets to define what's a qualified lead, right?
Yeah.
Or what's a qualified meeting. So there's those opportunities out there, but I have a cautionary note there because it does take time and investment. But I've for the most part, I just caution people that compare that to if I'm going to bring that resource in-house, right? But
yeah, I've had lots of disappointments in those areas. I'm optimistic about these folks. I'll let everybody know how it goes.
Okay, thank you. So the next, so there are some great technology components out there, but For the marketing perspective, the sales intelligence, I would call that Zoom info, right? You've got your content management system for all your web content, WordPress, Sitecore. There's a handful of those, and then marketing automation, Salesforce, marketing, HubSpot. So as you look at evaluating these technologies, that takes some time and effort, and there's costs associated with that too, right? But I would highly recommend that you have some of these core components just for the marketing, right? The sales intelligence, the content management, and the marketing automation. Next week we'll be talking about from the sales engagement, outreach, Sales Loft, conversational intelligence, Gong and Chorus, and then CRMs too. But to today, that from a marketing perspective, here's some of the very important components of marketing will have the information will be fed into the CRMs as well, but certainly your content management, marketing automation, and sales intelligence. But when we talk about marketing automation, you said, Ken, previously that you've got all these people out there saying they're SEM experts, but okay, I want to go look at marketing automation. Well,
Yeah.
you can see it's like, holy, what? We've got there's almost countless numbers of different type of technology, different type of platforms. So this slide came from an organization called G2. So if you don't have a platform in place, or if you do have a platform in place and it's not meeting your criteria, I guess the moral of the story is A, there's a lot of options, but B, because there are a lot of options, it makes the evaluation even more difficult. And then to kind of pile on here, marketing analytics, it's not like your SEM Rush and some of these other ones. It's just there's literally dozens of opportunities to evaluate. But again, there's some pretty good resources out there that can help you through that process. If you've got questions, you can certainly put those questions in the shift spot, because I've worked with a lot of these tools, and you can see on there's Salesforce and HubSpots, but there's some other ones that are also quite capable and quite good too. So let's talk about KPIs. So I think that here's just a snapshot, and I'm sorry it might be a little difficult to read, but this snapshot is some of the KPIs that I've used with different clients. I mean, this is a Salesforce dashboard, but there's, if you just kind of read across there, starting with the upper left, it's kind of leads generated by the sales rep. There's MQLs. The next one in the middle on the top is marketing qualified leads, current quarter and previous quarter. And that's, if you go along the bottom there, there's your different channels: website, inbound calling, trusted advisors, employee referrals, different events too, right? So again, you want to see where your leads are coming from. And then also, if I'm looking at the lead conversion, we talked about that earlier, Ken, you can okay, if I've got this many leads, how many actually converted, and what do they convert to, and what's the revenue? There's also, these are pretty straightforward metrics, but there's also, you've also got cost per lead in here. There's not a cost per lead in this particular dashboard. You also can talk about return on ad spend. That's difficult, but I think you certainly have to. And this is for a SaaS software company too. But again, these leads, it can go across multiple industries, professional services. You wouldn't have the ARR for professional services, obviously, but you'd have converted leads. So it's really industry agnostic, quite frankly. And then if we look at these in general, you can also track, okay, if you're doing SDRs or your sales reps and are getting an equal number of MQLs, if they're converting, if they're converting different number of SQLs, or if their close rates are different, you can get to that level of granularity, which I would encourage you to do, right? So that, that way you can start analyzing your resources. Is like, boy, this one individual, he's kicking ass on his, excuse my language, he's kicking butt on his conversion from MQLs to SQLs, and then he's got a much higher conversion rate into opportunities than the 25% target, right? So it's so important to because it is classic. Is you can't, I'm a data-driven guy. So if you can't, it's a classic. If you can't measure it, how in the world are you going to manage it? Because we are talking about, significant investment in money, right?
Right.
So I'm sorry, Ken, did you have a
I was
question?
confirming. Yes, and right. Yes, I was.
Okay, so the next slide we look at is like, okay, what does all this mean? So I thought it might be kind of interesting just to come up with an example here. This example is for like early market validation of a price on a SaaS product, right? So you could build this for a lot of different things, but this one is for a SaaS product, right? So you want to drive it to awareness, interest, decision, and action. So you got inbound leads, outbound calling, lead follow-up campaigns, but okay, what are you doing? You want to test a pricing hypothesis, right? You want to build some ROI and business impact statements. That's content. You want to identify and validate target markets. That's part of the framework we talked about. I also want to determine sales cycles, right? So, so if we look at some of the deliverables, that's, what information can we gather to build a sales process? And this is when we talk about early market validation, this is probably for a smaller company, but, as I've done some advising for incubators, I've leveraged this for, smaller startups to, all the way up to like $15-20 million companies that are introducing a new product, right? Or they're targeting a new vertical possibly. But again, this is not rocket science, but you have to do each step, because if you're not doing it, you will pay the price, I can assure you. And also I will add that there is no silver bullet either. So, but this is, it's just like, okay, you got to drive awareness, then interest, then decision, then action, right? So this is just kind of an example where you could, look at your overall lead progress, how what you're doing for your campaign follow-up, what's your cadence of the campaign, what kind of content are you using, how many meetings you're getting scheduled based on your outbound calls. So this is kind of, an example of how you can use all the information we've talked about previously throughout this conversation. So it's like, okay, great, that's one thing, but where do I start? What's next, right? So complete a marketing maturity scorecard. I'll show an example of that. That's a whole nother discussion as well, but essentially that's we see, as you can see down there, there's a content assessment, but this is an overall ranking of your marketing. And I'll talk, and I've got next slide, we'll talk about a little bit of the specific components in that. But again, you need to establish a baseline. And this is a good way to do that. So the revenue, so how much revenue do I want to use? The numbers that I've used and I've seen out there for years, especially for smaller companies, defined as under 50 million, and then 8 to 12% of annual revenue just for marketing. So there's the sales component on top of that as well, but this is just for marketing. So, in-house resources versus agency. We talked about that a couple of slides ago. The combination, I've seen the combinations work very well for companies, in that $5 to $25 million range, and maybe a little bit higher. There's also, evaluate your technology stack, evaluate what your content is, and then from there, you start developing your omnichannel marketing strategies. So includes SEO and SEM. So again, you need to figure out where you are today, your as is, and then you incorporate some of those metrics you talked about earlier, that if I've got to drive, 50 deals, that means I need 5,000 leads or something like that, right? So you need to do that. So the marketing maturity scorecard, and earlier in the conversation we talked about, okay, what does my website look like? What does my blog look like? How is my SEO? How are my analytics? In this one, you can tell there's a lot of opportunity for improvement, right? But I've done this I did for one of my client companies, and they admit that when you look at this, I think this is a great visual. When you look at this, you're like, oh gosh, where do I start, right?
Yeah.
So, but again, these are key components of your marketing organization. We've talked about a lot of those. We didn't talk about PR today either, but that's okay. I mean, that's a pretty easy outreach once you've got all these other pieces done. So again, look, if I go back one here, this start at the top with your marketing maturity scorecard, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated, right? So, but in these components, I don't think these 11 components they should not change. Maybe you don't want to have public relations in there right away, right? But these other ones are absolutely critical. So what's my expected results? I'm doing all this. What do I get out of it? So I get increased lead flow. And that's like, it will happen. I can guarantee that if you follow this plan and program, and you've got your framework in place from our previous session, you will in fact get increased lead flow. And then with the quality content utilized by sales and marketing, that will drive increased lead conversion. And then we need to track these campaigns, and we track those campaigns using some of those KPIs we had discussed earlier, and that's going to end up with more qualified deals. And guess what that means? More revenue. Meeting your revenue expectations.
Yep.
So with that's kind of the summary for today, Ken. Any other questions on?
Yeah. Actually, we got about 3 minutes. So yep. You nailed the time. Appreciate it. So you talked about investment and leads and everything. Is there a rule of thumb of when those investments start to pay off? Right. I know a lot of owners start to get frustrated. Well, I'm spending $5,000 a month, and I just started last month in marketing, and I'm not getting anything out of it. When should those investments begin to pay off? Number one, and number two, when do you typically say now it's time to abandon an investment and try something else?
I would say there's an in-between question is like, what do I adjust my spend, right? So I would, you need to give all these programs 90 days.
Okay.
Minimum of 90 days. And you can make adjustments every 30 days, which I encourage you to do, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can do some A/B testing. We haven't talked about that a lot, but as your outbound campaigns, your branding, you can say, okay, I'm going to try this piece of content to this buyer persona. I'm going to try a little bit different piece of content to another buyer persona, right? So,
yeah.
And I would say that
longer it takes, right? I mean, it's not just, I think some people think that you put up a website and everybody comes visits you, right? I mean, just to even drive that traction from an SEO perspective or content perspective, that could take a year.
It can, but I mean, I think you adjust after 90 days. I mean, you mentioned Viola earlier today. I mean, and we utilized her at GCE, and I think it was, we started seeing some results at 90 days, and she is pretty, and we see even better results in 6 months, right? But it takes a minimum of 90 days, and typically you should let it run for, make some adjustments along there, but don't abandon it before 5 months, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Great advice. Awesome, Jim. I appreciate this. Very valuable. As the previous week, we'll be pushing this out in our podcast, and this will go in the community and everything. So I'm going to encourage everyone to go take a listen and take a watch the video inside the community as well. And if you have any additional questions, please tag Jim and in some of the issues calls, right? If you're really struggling in some of the areas of sales and marketing, bring those to the table as well, and we can tag Jim and see if he's got availability to jump on some of those as well. But very insightful. I appreciate it. And what is next week again, Jim?
Next week is the sales component. So we'll talk about opportunity management, sales process. So that's, again, we've been the building blocks, right? The foundation, the marketing, and then now the sales.
All right, this is where the meat eaters come in, right? And this is
That's right.
this is where the execution happens. All
That's right.
the other stuff, it's fun, but this is where it's got to happen. So looking forward to that.
Yep.
All
Thank
right.
you, Ted.
All right.